This United Methodist Church, located in the heart of one of the fastest growing areas in North Carolina, looks like a church your great-grandparents might have attended. Some of the church's 5 different weekend worship services are very traditional and would be familiar to your great-grandparents. But sometimes, worship looks quite different. Apex United Methodist Church is an example of how a United Methodist Church can be open to new forms of worship, which find creative ways to nurture a healthy congregation and reach new disciples. Throughout eastern North Carolina, you will find United Methodist congregations large and small, rural and urban, with great economic and ethnic diversity, being led by the Spirit to greater levels of health and wholeness, striving to fulfill the mission statement of the North Carolina Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. Healthy congregations and effective leaders in every place, making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Yes, we believe that we can have healthy congregations in every place. Bishop Al Gwynn of the North Carolina Conference.
Well, certainly there are many marks of a healthy congregation, but I would say they do include those things I've been talking about in regard to radical hospitality, passionate worship, intentional spiritual formation from the cradle all the way to the grave, and then risk-taking ministry and mission to the world.
Like many other congregations in this annual conference, Apex United Methodist Church is a healthy church, growing even healthier. There are 5 worship services, beginning with a Saturday evening service. More than 1,000 people gather to worship in this place each week. This Sunday was to have been a Pentecost in the Park service, like last year, but a drought-breaking tropical storm turned Pentecost in the Park into Pentecost in the gym.
What were we thinking when our first hymn was "Send Down the Power, Let It Fall Like Rain"?
On this Sunday, radical hospitality, passionate worship, intentional spiritual formation, and risk-taking ministries are all evident.
Well, we like to believe that our hospitality is radical, and so we try to make people feel welcome from when they first come into our parking lot. And so we have people out in the parking lot with an umbrella and a big smile.
You don't have to be a visitor to feel the Christian energy of this church. Members from all of the weekly worship services have gathered for this special time.
It's a family setting, and I think we get to interact with each other more than we would in a traditional setting. It's really an open way to worship.
And there's a real sense of care among our church members and enjoyment.
Send it on now.
Oh, it's energy for the week.
And don't forget that radical hospitality.
I tell our leaders that the 3 minutes after the final prayer are the most important, as people once again are affirmed for their visit and then encouraged to come back.
In every place, churches in the North Carolina Conference have opportunities to grow healthier. Sometimes the secret is recognizing the opportunity.
We have a great fear in the church today that change will destroy us rather than recreate us. I think it was Francis Schaeffer who reminded us that the greatest mistake that Christians seem to be making today is wanting to live in the world as it was, or live in the world as we want it to be. But as he says, the only real option is to live in the world as it is. And so that means there will need to be some change in the church.
This small church in Rhems is another example of a church which is growing healthier. It is in a very rural part of our state. There is no great influx of people. The health of a congregation can be irrespective of its size. For this small membership, mostly older congregation, it was a matter of looking around their community and recognizing an opportunity to reach out to immigrant children who long to know Jesus Christ. As many older members passed on, this church prayed for change.
And they began to ask God to bring them children. And one of the things I found out is God answers our prayers, but not always in the way we expect.
They began sponsoring refugees, 4 at first, then 4 more, until on this Sunday, of the 93 people in attendance, 46 are Burmese refugees. God has indeed brought children to this church.
And it's so fun to see some of the sweet little old ladies hug on those little children. And even though they can't understand what they're saying, they surely understand.
80-year-old Helen Dawley is one of the leaders bringing in the young families.
So we were totally without children. And now we have a lot. We replace our empty seats with these refugees from Burma, who are delightful people.
While Reverend Stutts hasn't figured out how to translate her sermons into the 3 different languages of her new parishioners, the scriptures are read in all the languages.
We have to take the part that Jesus would have taken were he with us. And these people have come from terrible situations.
Many of our churches are finding unique ways to create healthy congregations and effective leaders in every place. We hope you've noticed that radical hospitality, passionate worship, intentional spiritual formation from the cradle to the grave, and risk-taking ministries can be woven so tightly into the fabric of the church that it is difficult to say where one ends and another begins. It can and should extend beyond the walls of the church. This community garden was created by the Cedar Grove United Methodist Church. This used to be a dangerous corner of the community, the scene of a nearby murder. Fear and mistrust used to be the crops of these fields, but no more.
We've seen that the garden has become a place where people who don't normally associate with each other, people who don't normally interact on their day-to-day dealings, can come here and get to know one another, even become friends.
Fred is the manager of the garden. People working side by side in the garden have created community bonds that weren't there before.
It's just a blessing to come out here to the garden. It's a healing process.
And while they are planting seeds for corn, cabbage, and tomatoes, they are also planting seeds of faith, and that is producing a harvest as well.
We've seen people start coming to church as a result of coming to the garden.
Church members say they feel God smiles when he sees the garden and the people working together in the garden.
Shout to the Lord, all the earth, let us sing.
It is 7:30 in the morning at the Marion Edwards Recovery Center Initiatives building in Goldsboro. These teens from Jacksonville are preparing for another day of work in a week-long Footprints youth camp. Following morning devotions, they'll resume work on a much-needed wheelchair ramp. It is hard work in 90-degree temperatures, but as Evan says, that's okay.
You're working hard and, you're sweating, but all that sweat, every drop you feel, it gets better and better because you know that you're actually doing something that's good and it's going to help somebody else.
There is more going on here than first meets the eye.
I've learned how to show God's love in everything I do, and I've learned how to see God in other people.
Brian Wellborn is the youth minister at Jacksonville's Trinity United Methodist Church.
We're all on the journey. We may be at different points in the journey, but we're all on the journey, and we need to encourage each other to keep moving along during that journey in the right direction.
We have a kid who grew up with atheist parents who, has called a taxi just to get to church on Sunday mornings, and just seeing how these kids will be here for you no matter what.
Evan is the young man from the atheist background, and without the youth group, he says,
like I'd be out on the streets doing who knows what, and the youth group, it basically saved my life.
Like Stephanie, he is considering a career in the ministry.
I've realized that God has more plans for me, and God's actually calling me into ministry. And it's an amazing feeling to actually feel God every day of my life.
As you can see, there are United Methodist congregations of all sizes and circumstances, which are following in the footsteps of the church in the second chapter of Acts. Empowered by the Spirit, our congregations are making disciples for the transformation of the world. Bishop Gwynn invites us to read Acts 2.
But I would hope that folk would read about it not as someone's past history, but as our present instruction and encouragement. Loving God with all of our heart, that we worship in spirit and in truth, individually and collectively with passion, that we love other people unconditionally, all people, whoever they might be, even as we love ourselves, and that we're willing to go, that we don't sit back and wait on folk to come to us, but that we go and reach to all kinds of people. We do as Jesus did. We try to love people in the same way Jesus loved people. And we bring them into fellowship. We teach them. We make disciples of folk. And we turn then and help them to go out into the uttermost parts of the world.
Yes, we believe we can have healthy congregations and effective leaders in every place, making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. May your congregation catch a vision of the healthy church that God dreams you to be. For it is in the power of the Holy Spirit that your church can live into God's dream of a healthy congregation in every place.